Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video we're going to show you how we made the brake lines for the trick chassis rear end that we installed in the last episode. So let's get started. So if you watched the last episode, you've already seen everything, all the brake lines installed, or this whole complete rear end installed. But what I didn't show you was how I mocked up everything. Here's the bracket I made to put the brake line, the stock brake line on. I kept my old one for mock-up purposes, and I'll show you why here shortly. But I got the brackets welded on. I think I showed you that in the last video, with the keepers for the 3AN hose going to the caliper. I made several brackets here, guys. I made this thing here. I was going to put it was a piece of tubing, and I welded me a short piece of metal to the top, welded a nut on the bottom, and I kept trying to come up with brackets, and I thought, you know what, simpler is better. So we're just going to put this on the back brace, and I can always take it off without welding to the main housing. That was my thought. Didn't want to weld anything on here. So if you saw the last video, I routed the lines around through here, and I'll show you that in this video, and I'll show you how some tips and tricks to making brake lines when we put them in here. So let's go over here to the table. Let me show you what we got. Then we'll get you set up, and I'll show you how to make some brake lines. So here's what we're going to be using today. I ordered this from Amazon, and I'll put the link to the part number in the description. You can see it here. But I've got a short piece of copper wire that's for making a pattern. Got some brake fluid. Just got my all-day carry pocket knife. And I've got a few sections of brake line, and I bought full sections at the parts store to make my lines out of. You can buy rolls of brake line and things like that off Amazon or Summit or Jegs or whatever you prefer. But this is not the high-dollar Eastwood kit. I'd love to have one of those, but for making just the few brake lines that I'm going to make, this is all I need. And basically, it's your holder for different sizes, your 3/16, your 1/4 inch, 5/8, 3/8, and a half. It comes with a tubing cutter, your flaring tool, with your double flares. And I'll show you how to make a double flare with these. I'll get you set up and I'll show you. This is just to tighten these up, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So these are the nuts that came off of this one piece of tube was as long as this one. And but the first thing I want to show you is we're going to cut this, and we're going to practice. And I would encourage you, if you can spare, you know, a 5 or 6 inch piece of line, I would encourage you to make several of these before you try it on the actual product. So let me get you set up. We'll cut this, we'll flare one, and then we're going to take this piece, and this is going to be that short piece on the driver's side. I'm actually going to put a bend in it. I could make it straight, but I want to put a bend in it because I don't want to try to bend the hose or stretch the tube, I should say. I don't want to try to stretch that tube in between those two coupling points, and then if I tighten it up, it start pulling on it. So I want to have a little Z bend in it so that it'll give it some room to move in and out. So all right, with all that being said, let's get you set up. Let's practice cutting one of these, and we will show you the end result. Then we'll make the one on the passenger side, or the driver's side, and we'll end out the video. I don't want to make a real long video on this. There's thousands of these how to make brake lines on YouTube, and I don't want to carry it out. Some of you just ask about what I did and how I come up with this, so I'm just going to show you. So let's get started. So the reason I've got this brake fluid here, I'm going to pour me a cap full. I'm going to set it down here, and I'm going to use it to lubricate the tooling that's going to go on the piece of hose. So you can see this one's already been in the tool here. We're going to go ahead and take our pipe cutters, and some of these come with tubing cutters. I call it a pipe cutter. Some of them come with tubing cutters, some of them don't. This is the best way to get the smoothest cut. And basically what you do is make your marks. When you get your measurements made, make your marks, and always leave a little extra, about 1/8 of an inch, that screws up into your fittings, and I'll show you that here in just a second. But what we're going to do is we're going to just snug this. If you tighten it too tight, you'll never be able to spin it, and you're going to start spinning. And I'll speed this up, but basically start spinning it, and you're going to tighten a little bit every time you spin it. So let's speed this up and get this cut. And there you have it, guys. We cut through there. You can see what the ends of it look like. See how it's kind of pushed in from the blade, pushing in on the tube. Typically, a lot of tubing cutters have this little triangular shaped blade that you flip out and you take and you ream the end of this. Now, you can use, you can get one of those, but that's what I'm going to use here. I'm just going to take my pocket knife. I'm just going to kind of deburr this. They also make deburring tools, but just deburr this. Make sure that you blow out the end of your tube before you install it, because you're going to see little metal shavings. You don't want those little metal shavings inside your brakes. So now that we've got that deburred, and you might even take a little piece of sandpaper and scuff that up, but you can see how much cleaner the end of that is. So now what we're going to do, we're going to loosen this up. This is our 3/16. We're going to take our piece of tubing and just lightly set it in here for now, because we are going to make a double flare. And what a double flare looks like is this right here. Let me get it up here where you can see. That's what a double flare looks like. So what we're going to do is you take your tool for the 3/16, you flip it over. What you want to do is make sure that the tube that sticks through here is level with the top of this. This is kind of also like a gauge. It's going to tell you how much brake line to put through here. So we're a little bit high, so let me pull this down just a smudge. A little low, so let me get it pushed back up just a little. Make sure that you keep your tooling square. I can go ahead and flip this around. Kind of snug it up just a little bit. And that looks about perfect. So remember I told you I had this is just a 5/8 combination wrench, and I got this because it's easier to tighten this tooling up than it is by hand. Hurts your hands if you try to do this just with your fingertips. Just like that. Good and tight. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of brake fluid. Probably better to wear gloves than it is to get this stuff on you. Brake fluid is not good for you. And I'm going to put some on the inside of this just to make sure it gets lubricated. I'm going to flip it over and work it around good in there. Now, let's take our presser here. And you're going to want to slide this over, just like so, and tilt it up. And go ahead, I need to run it all the way up first. I should have did that. Go ahead and turn it to where it's locked. Then before you put it on top of this, make sure you got some brake fluid, just as lubrication, so it's not metal to metal sliding around. There we go. Now, make sure your compression tool is down in the top of your die, and you're going to tighten this up. So let me turn this sideways where you can see what's going on. So you're just going to tighten it by hand until you can see it's squeezing the tube, and you're just going to want to tighten it by hand. You don't have to, and when it stops, you don't have to just keep torquing on it. You don't want to over tighten it. And, oh, sorry. Now that feels good, and my die is all the way down. Okay, now we're going to take it out. And I've already practiced with this. This is why I encourage you guys to practice with it. Now, once you get this loose, and out of the... Now, you don't have to take this out, but the problem I ran into is this die here. When it was new, it gets stuck inside my line. I can twist it. Man, it is stuck inside there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep twisting it. And I have, what I did earlier, is I stuck it in here in one of the bigger holes, like maybe the 5/16. Kind of clamp this back together. And I'm assuming the more I use it, the better it'll loosen up a little bit. What I did is stuck it in here, and I will just kind of work it. It's moving, but it's slow to come out. Oops. Let's try this again. Let's stick it through the bigger hole. And I dropped it in the floor. Let me grab it. Okay, found it. Don't want to let that guy get away. Now we're done with this piece. You can put that back in your toolkit. One thing I forgot to mention, I hope you hadn't followed me this far. Don't forget to put your nuts on here. This piece, I've already flared one end and the other end. But don't forget to put your nuts on here and make sure that you've got them oriented the correct way. The reason I didn't mention it is my fault, and I'm sorry, is because this is just a practice piece and I wasn't going to use it. But here's what that first... Let me wipe that off so you can see. Here's what that first compression looks like. Now what you're going to do is put it back in your tool. And this time, you're going to want to set it right down in. You see how these things are beveled? You're going to want to set this right down in there flush with it. Make sure your tool's flush. Now we're going to tighten it up again. The only thing I don't like about these types of tools is the fact that it puts, to hold that tube, if you look down in there, it's got grooves. And those grooves leaves tooling marks on the end of your brake line. But I'm going to sand this down with some Scotch-Brite pad, or I already have. You've seen the video. What I did is I just scuffed it up with some Scotch-Brite, or you can take some emery cloth and knock those tooling marks. It's not going to hurt anything because your nuts are going to cover most of it, especially like mine, for whatever reason. One came with one short nut and one came with one long one. So if you use the one on the long side, it's going to cover. It's going to cover that anyway. But these are primed and painted, but I'm going to scuff these up and paint them as you saw in the video anyway. So that doesn't matter to me. Getting back to making the second crimp, you'll see here, put this back on here just like you did originally. Put you a little bit of brake fluid on the tip of your press. Make sure you get it lined up with the hole. Get the tip in there. And now we're going to press this down until it's snug. That's snug enough. Again, I wished I had the Eastwood tool. Those things are pretty expensive for somebody that doesn't make as many brake lines as I'm going to have to make. I just can't justify the expense. But there you have it, guys. There is a double flare. Looks really good. other than the tooling marks right here. And like I said, you can take some Scotch-Brite and clean it up, repaint it. You'll never see it. It's going to be under the car anyway. But the last trick that I want to show you guys, let me get you over here to the truck, and I'll show you how I made those bends and those fittings over on the rear end on my truck. So, give me just 1 second. Okay, guys, I'm going to break in here something I forgot to mention. If you need to know how much distance your flare takes up off of your tube, if you're making a critical measurement on this tube and you need to know, well, how much material does it take out of this length, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mark right here. Probably can't see that. And I'm going to measure it. Let's see exactly how long it is. Let's go to 5 inches. And that end of the tube is right, that's dead on 7/16. Now, that way when I calculate my flare or put my flare on here, I can go back to my mark, and if I know it was 7/16, I can subtract how many 1/16 of an inch it takes out or whatever, and that'll give me a good measurement. So I'm going to go ahead and flare this, and we'll remeasure it and see how many 1/16 of an inch does it take out. That way when you're making your measurement, you can deduct out that flare or add to it so that when you flare, it'll give you the exact measurement of the tube you need. So let me flare this right quick, and we'll remeasure. Okay, guys. Let's look and see how much. So it was an inch and 7/16. So that flare, if I start out, let's start it back on the 5. So it took 1/8 of an inch. It's exactly, if you can see, 1 1/4 inches from my mark to the end, and it was 1 7/16. So it took actually 3/16 of an inch. 3/16 of an inch is what this tooling takes to make one of these. That's a lot more than I would have thought. I said at the first about 1/8, but I missed it by 1/16. So add 3/16 of an inch to your tube for a correct measurement. Now let's get back to the video. Okay, guys. Now there are easier ways to do this. You could get stainless braided lines that screw right into here and run it up to a T and do the same thing for each side, but I wanted to hard line as much as I could and just put the 9-inch flexible stainless steel lines here. But the trick I was going to show you, you'll notice this angle is a little off, and the way I made my lines in that video is I took me a piece of copper wire. You could use a coat hanger, but I measured inside of here, and remember, when you make that flare, leave at least 1/8 or 3/16 of an inch. And what I did is I measured that, and I could have made it straight with a little bend in it, but what I wanted to do was put just a little bit of a Z-bend in it. That way, when I go to put my line in here, when I screw it in, that will pull that Z, whatever it needs to pull it in without, if I made it straight, and I try to take this out and jam it in here, and I start pulling on it, if it's just a little bit short and I can't tell it, I'm pulling those ends with those flares, and I don't want to do that. If I want something to pull, I want this bend right here to straighten out without compromising my sealing integrity, or whatever you want to call it, the way it seals inside of these fittings. So that's why I've got that little bend in my line. I know it would look a lot prettier if it was straight, or if it had some kind of cool looking design, but I just wanted it to work. And the same thing going from here over to the other side. I just took a longer piece of wire, made my pattern, and bent the line the way I needed it to go. And that is how I made my brake lines, guys. If you didn't see the final installation, check out my last video. If you didn't see it, I'll put a link to the video up here in this video. I'll also put a link to it in the description below. you like what you see, hit that like button. If you want to see more content like this, hit the subscribe button, and we'll catch you guys in the next episode.